In this session, we looked at peer and self-assessment, and we also looked at effective questioning, as it's one of the most important assessment tools we have, and it can be used very effectively if we think about the different levels and depths of assessment. So in the class we had a look at an example assignment, and we used the rubric of the grading criteria that your work's going to be assessed on, to have a look at how we can make a judgment about the grade to which the assignment will be given. And you all did really well on that. The justifications were really good. We did have a spread of grades, but that's to be expected to be as a one-off session without any practice or any idea. But the justifications were really interesting. Now take on board what people were saying when it comes to your own assignment, and I've emailed you a copy of the rubric, the grading criteria, etc., and a checklist for yourself to go through just before you hand the assignment in. So make use of that before you submit, just to make sure you've got everything in there. One of the reasons why peer and self-assessment is really important is because the people we deal with often have a lot of expectations of what education is because of the situation they've been in. They come with a lot of baggage, a lot of pre-knowledge of what a test is, what an assignment is, and are very often worried, scared, or just don't really want to engage in the assessment process. Self and peer assessment helps with that, because you can develop their self-esteem, you can get them involved, and they feel part of the grading process. And this quote here was from Huddleston and Unwin. So self and peer assessment, it can increase student involvement and motivation, increase the amount of feedback you give, which is particularly what Black and William were interested in their article, and I would recommend you read that for your assignment and mention them in there, because they do have some very informative information and guidance on the effective use of feedback and self and peer assessment. It creates an awareness of how the assessment criteria works and engages the students in that process. It's a formative assessment itself, so it's a valid method you could use throughout the course, getting the students to really get involved and lead up to the summative assessment, so they've had a chance to engage, reflect, and really build on the learning that they've done. And just remember though that you will probably have to get heavily involved at the beginning to set them up to discuss the situation and how the process works, but maybe that will start depleting a little bit as they get more confident in assessing their own work and each other's with confidence, in a way where they can be critical without getting too upset about what people are saying, because it's all about that work, not really about the person. So have a look at that Black and William article I've sent. It's also available on the website below. So questioning. Why do we ask questions? Discussed in class. We came up with some ideas, and one of them you could think of as arousing curiosity, getting people to think about what they're learning and why they're learning it. It also stimulates interest in the topic that you're trying to talk about. You can use it to clarify concepts and engage the students in a discussion about what you're trying to sort of get over to them. It also can be used to emphasize key points, and it's there as well to enhance problem solving ability and encourage students to think at higher cognitive levels. And we'll look at that when we look at the different types of question and how we can really challenge those learners. It can also be used to motivate students and get them to search for more and new information on top of what they've already learned. And you can use it obviously to ascertain knowledge of where they're at, and then use that information to develop further questions or further skills to really challenge those that are more able, as well as getting more knowledge out of the learners who need a bit more support. So if you look at the different types, type 1 are the fact questions. These are the knowledge, the comprehension questions, where there's only pretty much a yes or no or a definitive black and white response. Then there's the type 2 questions, which are description questions, asking a little bit more. Well, can you describe that? What happened? What did you observe? There's type 3 questions, or explanation. So you've described what happened, now why did that happen? And really going to explore that a little bit more. Then there's the proving point, type 4 question. So yes, that did happen. What evidence is there for that occurring? Where else can you get evidence of that happening, or what the justification for that particular thing is? and then compare, drawing on the prior learning. So yeah, that does that. Well, how does that compare to what we've learned before? How does that compare to something in a different situation? As well as those 5 types, there's also a few other question types that you need to be aware of. These include extension, so they're the supplementary questions. So you ask a question and then you want a bit more and to really get a little bit more depth out of the student. There's clarification, getting the student to repeat what they said and maybe in a slightly different way helps you confirm that they know what they're talking about, and also might help the others in the class if they didn't understand the initial response. Then there's a justification. It's getting them to really sort of look at well, why they've done something and justifying that. That links a little bit to type 4 questions, but also let's talk through mistakes and errors that are made and justify their thoughts and processes of getting over those errors or getting over past those mistakes. Prompting questions, that's those questions where you're trying to get a response from some students, especially the quiet ones. Never leave a student behind. If you ask them a question and they don't answer, you could use the redirection, which is the question below there, it's question type below, to move on to someone else to maybe try and get something out of them, and then always come back to that original person until you get some sort of response from them. It's very, very important not just to leave them hanging if they didn't know the answer. Maybe asking for supplementary or further clarification questions to get that information out of them. And there's also what I didn't mention in class is you could use the 3 Ps, where you could pose a question. Well, it's pose, pause, pounce. So you pose the question, pause as everybody takes that question in, thinks of an answer, and then pounce on someone. Directed questioning. So looking for someone to really get a response from. Try not to use too many general open questions where you're waiting for a response from the group, because you'll always get the same people answering. Try and target some of the questions to each individual as you're going around and as you're going through the learning. The pause is really important. So in the pose, pause and pounce, you pose the question and then pause and then direct the question at somebody to get a response. You could also use the pause after you've asked someone as well. So if you ask somebody a question, don't answer it for them. Wait. Maybe count to 10 in your head. Don't be tempted to break that silence too early, because then you end up jumping in or somebody else jumps in. Try and get that response from the person, even if it's I don't know, at least get them to answer you back, and then you can work on the other question types to try and get something from them. All this sort of development of questions does relate to Bloom, so think back to Bloom's taxonomy, because you're going from the basic knowledge questions through analysis, through synthesis, etc., further up. And I've also included on the website, you can have a look at, is a presentation by Jeff Petty about multi-choice questions. So if you do need to ask multi-choice questions, there's a little PowerPoint to give you some examples and ideas of what to think about when developing those questions. So you can have a look at that in your own time if you think that's important. Analyse and evaluate questioning and assessment method. I've given another article called Effective Questioning. So have a look at that and think about the questions you do and you use. How does it relate to what the suggestions of good practice are within that piece? Just a quick reminder, micro teachers start on the 18th of November. So think of what you're going to do for 20 minutes. And in there, think of the structure of the lesson and also how you're going to assess people. So is it going to be question and answering, or are you going to do something a bit different? Is it going to be a handout, a quiz? Whatever it is, make sure you definitely assess people that they've learned what you've been talking about. So make sure you have that in there somewhere. It's difficult with only 20 minutes, but there will be an opportunity in there to really find out what they've learned so far in your session. So I'll set up some time slots and we can negotiate that, and we'll set up, starting from the 18th of November, the series of micro teachers where you get a chance to show yourself off a bit. And don't panic that, we're all in it together, we're all doing it, and it's an informal way of really having a look at what you've picked up so far in the teaching, learning and assessment module. In the class we went on to have a look at Three Little Pigs, which is an interesting story. There's a lot to it. It's not just a kid's story. If you look into it a little more depth, there is a lot to be learned, and the background from it can be quite interesting of where it came from. What we looked at was developing the questions from basic knowledge questions right up to more in-depth knowledge, comparison questions, justification questions, evidence questions of the story of the Three Little Pigs. So it could go from something like how many pigs were in the story to up to the story was written in the 1930s during the Depression. Which countries do the pigs and the wolf represent, and how could that be transposed onto the current economic situation of the world? It can get a bit carried away looking into these things. So hopefully you got some ideas of there. Have a look at the Black and Williams stuff. Have a look at the effective questioning, and if you get a moment, look at Jeff Petty's multi-choice question analysis.